Hi everybody, my name is Freya and I am the Jobs Market and Careers Fair Officer here at IATEFL. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our next session of IATEFL Career Guides. These are a collection of online chats, online live chats that are designed to give members of the ELT community the opportunity to explore a range of subjects with industry experts and experienced professionals. Here to join us today, please welcome Rachel Appleby, who will be discussing with you how to teach one-to-one. Rachel is a teacher and trainer based in Budapest, Hungary. She has over 25 years experience in one-to-one teaching, business English and EAP, and tutors on the Consultants eTeacher training course Teaching One-to-One. She is also co-author of Business One-to-One, which is the only course book series for this context published by OUP. At this stage, I would just like to ask, to say that you're very free to add notes and comments into the chat box, which is going already, so that's great. But if we could save any questions to add into the chat box at the very end of Rachel's presentation, and that way I won't miss any of the questions to present to Rachel in the Q&A at the end. I will now hand you over to Rachel.
Thank you very much. I've just covered my chat with Post-its, which isn't very clever. But anyway, thank you very much for that very nice intro, Freya. It feels like really you've said everything I need to say, so I could go home now. But oh, I am at home, of course. It's really nice to be here with so many people, an awful lot of familiar names as well. It's chucking it down outside. It's disgusting. So I feel much happier with all of you. Thank you very much for coming along and saying hello and all of that. And ideally, this is a 30-minute mini presentation, if you like, and then a 30-minute Q&A. I hope I don't run over. If you've got any questions, as Freya mentioned, try to hang on to them, but if they're specifically relevant and if I notice them in the chat, I'll do what I can to answer them. So thank you very much. Let me move over to the slides. It's mostly slides. There'll be a little bit of, occasionally I'll ask you to put something in the chat, but mostly we'll keep that for the Q&A. Let me share what I've got here. Okay, I hope you can see this. Let me just open the chat separately, then I've got that there as well. Okay, great, good. So I feel very privileged to be part of this exciting series. There are all sorts of topics coming up. I think it's going to be a great treasure chest, a repository, or I think treasure chest is a nice idea. A load of goodies for us to access later on as recordings, which is extremely useful. But on to one-to-one, which is my favourite area of teaching. And I hope some of the things I'm going to say will tell you why. When I was asked to do this, I thought, well, gosh, what do people really want from this sort of a session? It's only 30 minutes, you know, what would you expect? And I asked a few people, and these kind of summarise the questions that they asked me. What is it that's different? And what's it like that you would not expect? Well, first and foremost, I think the most important thing to say is that one-to-one teaching is one-to-one teaching. It isn't not group teaching, but we sometimes can't help but focus on, well, I'm used to teaching a group, if that's how you've been brought up, if you like. So let's have a look at these two things. So what I think is different is, first of all, there's just one person and it's what they want, and it's at their speed. If they want to go slowly, why rush? If they want to go fast or don't want to do something, move on. It can be intensive and tiring. And I think it's important here to realize that it's not just for you intensive and tiring, but actually for the student. Don't forget to say, and all the more so online, do you want 5 minutes or do you want a few minutes break? And they are likely to say, you know, maybe in a 90-minute session even, yes, that would be great. Most of my students do. I switch off my camera, I mute myself, and we just have 2 or 3 minutes only and then come back. And I put my camera back on when I'm ready, and I hope they are. It's often very two-dimensional. It's just, and again, all the more so online, it's you and it's me. And that can be very straining. So we need to think of how we can get away from that. But it is naturally authentic. It's very genuine, much more so than in a class. You know, with a group, you're trying to be, you know, friendly with everybody and take a real interest in your students. And I'm sure you do, but it's quite difficult, I think, with a group. And in one-to-one, it's much more natural. What perhaps you don't expect. And here are a few things that you might find interesting. So you can take your time. It's more relaxing. You can make opportunities to break out, maybe to move, to do something totally different. Provide space and time, and I'll talk about this in a moment. And obviously for me, I find it a hugely mutually beneficial learning experience. I always think I learn more from my one-to-one students than I teach them. And it is very authentic. I'll show you a few quotes from Peter Wilberg. He's written the Bible for one-to-one teaching. So I'm going to talk about 3 things, and for each thing, I'm going to talk about 3 sub-things. So I'm going to be talking about 9 things altogether. Now, in each category, I'll talk in detail about something, one thing, and I'll just mention the others. But these are the 3 things I'd like to talk about. Firstly, dynamics. Secondly, about what the student needs. And I've chosen this icon because we all need a bottle of water. I've got mine here. And we all need, I was asking a friend what icon I could use, and she said, oh, but we all need love as well. So here we've got love and a bottle of water for student needs. And the third category is effective language practice, lots of exercise. So let's look at the first one. Now, as I mentioned before, it can be very just you and me, and this can be the case if you're in the same physical space, or all the more so if you're online. And I think it's really important to add a third dimension. This could be literally a piece of paper and a pen. Now, whether it's you that's writing or the students that is writing, it actually takes that eye contact away, which breaks things up. It's much easier to manage. So I'm going to look at 3 things which I think help to add a third dynamic, third dimension. One is about space. One is about waltzing, because, hey, it's always good to dance, not least at the moment. And one is about materials. So let's try and keep things in 3s. 3 is always a good number for lots of things. Space. These are 2 photos of my kitchen table. And this is where I run my one-to-one lessons when they take place at home. That is obviously taken from above. Now, I don't know about you, obviously there's always coffee or tea or water or something around for me and for my student, but which seating situation would you prefer? Would you prefer the next to, or would you prefer the opposite? Now, if I can access the chat, and I've got a trouble with the mouse, I now can't see the mouse. Here we go. I wonder whether you prefer next to or opposite. Lots of different things coming in. Oh, or diagonal. Okay, fair enough. Depends on the task. Yes, maybe. Oh, a total mix. A total mix. That's quite interesting. I've always learned that you should be sitting next to each other. So the picture on the left. Because if you're opposite, there's much more of this, which I hate, direct eye contact. But it's not exactly next to. So the 2 chairs aren't next to each other. I think diagonal perhaps is better. Yes, I agree. Even with friends, opposite is a bit tricky. Okay, it's up to you. But I like let's call it the diagonal. Okay. Okay, let's move on. So dynamics and providing space. Here's a bit of space. Actually, here's a lot of space. This is a photo taken in Patagonia where there isn't really much else to see, and it's stunning, and it really helps you breathe. Now, in a one-to-one class, we need a lot of space. We need space because we need time. We need time to think. We need maybe time also, or space to listen. and maybe to move around. And that's not just true in a physical space when you're in one place, but actually I think also online as well. As I said before, don't be afraid occasionally to check with the student and agree to switch off the cameras. You might want space so that you can change direction or revise what you were going to do, which is probably in conjunction with what your student wants. So don't make decisions without involving your student. And maybe make space to write things down or to let your student write things down. They're going to need more time to write things down than you will, probably. Give them that space. And in a physical space, maybe actually just move away while they're doing that, or look as if you're doing something different. And all these things help add a third dimension. So that's a little bit on space. I mentioned waltzing. Now, you will know about drilling in a group class. You might want to get students to pronounce a word so they can pronounce it correctly, and you might demonstrate it and then get the students all together, everybody, to say the word as you said it. And then you might say it again and get them to repeat it. And then you might ask one or two students in the class to repeat it again. That kind of backwards and forwards, a march, if you like, a drill. Yeah, you can do it in time if you're into music, but it's a little bit like a drill. Now, in a one-to-one session, your student might never be able to pronounce that word, and until they turn, or even not, they might just be turning blue in the face. Please, I can't do this, because it's a lot of pressure. And another way of doing this, which again is something I've stolen from, I steal a lot of things from various places, but not least Wilberg, is turning pronunciation practice into a waltz. Now, you might be looking at word stress. Here's a well-known example of a word where the stress shifts depending on what part of speech it is. So we've got economics, economist, economic. Now, in a one-on-one situation, what I like to do is I say the first word, the student says the second word, I say the third word, then we do it again. The student says the first word, which I said last time, I say the second and they say the third. So we do this three-part thing twice, or we might do it 4 times or 6 times, but we both say each word at least once. So you kind of go round in a circle, and it's got a rhythm to it, this kind of waltzing 3-part rhythm. Here are some other words which follow similar sorts of shifting stress rules. And you can also do it with mini dialogues. Here are some very simple dialogues, because lots of mini dialogues are really only in 3 parts. So you can try those out. Okay. Okay, so that was the waltzing. The third thing, this is a picture of all the things I have with me when I'm teaching one-to-one. Now, would have them with me now if I was teaching online, as well as if I'm teaching at home with a student who comes to my place or I go to theirs. Now, there's lots of stuff here, not least a telephone. Now, a telephone has multiple uses. I used to have a tape recorder. I used to have a diary or a calendar. I used to have, I don't know, a map of Budapest or Hungary or Europe or the world or wherever, and we would use those things. But of course, now the phone stands in for all of those. You can also see a magazine, which is, it's good to have an up-to-date magazine where you might have an article you could focus on. You never know what's going to happen in a one-to-one class. And a book that's maybe got some useful vocab exercises in that you could draw on sort of last minute. There's a few other bits and bobs there. For example, there's a dice. I like to use a dice to give choice. It could be a choice of, what activity should we do next? Or maybe working with vocabulary and so on, playing games, all sorts of things. I don't know whether you have a favorite item that you always have with you in a one-to-one class that isn't pictured here, that you want to share. So this is I always have these things with me in my bag. Of course, always the coffee cups. Okay, now to make sure you've got that third dimension, it's very nice to ask the student perhaps to be noting down, recording, choosing something, moving post-its around, because then you've got not only the third dimension, but actually you've got the student being busy using them. Okay, so this is dynamics. These were my 3 things. I'm now going to move on to a quick quotation. and student needs. So these are the things that students need. And I'm going to look at 3 things. So a way for a student to lead a class, different ways of personalization, and then a couple of needs analysis examples. Now, I have a student I've taught for a long time. He's upper intermediate, maybe lower advanced actually. He doesn't really need English for his job. He can do everything he wants to be able to do. And he does a lot of reading in English. That's how he likes to keep his English level up and talk about what he reads. So I suggested that he could send me an article. And now every week he sends me an article. He chooses, it can be from anywhere about anything. It's not work related. And he, most recently, it was, or one of the more recent ones was about Japanese cinema. Now, this is not something I would necessarily read about, but I'm actually finding it quite interesting. And he highlights words that he doesn't understand or he wants to be able to use or wants clarification on. He sends me those words, he highlights them, and he sends me a list of questions about the article. So we turn the lesson round. He's giving me the tasks. Now, by the time we get to the lesson, I've obviously read the article, looked into these words and thought a little bit about them, perhaps come up with a little activity or exercise, and I've answered the questions and I'm ready to discuss it. So for him, that's a great opportunity to talk about something he's interested in. For him, that's a great takeaway. And it's very obviously 100% student-led. So that's just one example. Personalization. I like to imagine that when I'm having a lesson with a one-to-one student, I'm meeting a friend for a coffee. Now, when you meet someone for a coffee, a friend of yours, you'll have seen them perhaps quite recently. You'll have 1 or 2 things subconsciously that you might plan to talk about. It could be something you've got in mind you want to plan, or something you want to show them, something you want to tell them about. And yet, when you actually come to meet them, they might have something totally different that is really important that they want to share with you or get your advice on. Now, you're not going to say, hang on a minute, I've got this I want to talk about. You treat it as it's an ongoing, it's a mutual exchange of ideas. It's a friend. And you would obviously let those things go and say, yes, of course, what is it? You know, how can I help? Or what did you want to show me? Or, you know, whatever it might be. And I like to think that one-to-one classes are a little bit like that. You have ideas and they're probably going to be a lot more fixed than just something to chat about with a friend. Have a plan, but be prepared, be willing to let it go. You have to obviously be willing to let it go, because if your student turns up with something they really want to talk about, then they really want to talk about it, whatever that might be. So I always have things that I'm ready to go with students, with each individual student. They're always different things. But I always say, is there anything you want to do? Or what should we do today? Or what should we do first? I usually give them that choice as well. And we focus on what they need. It might be that you spend 40 minutes on an email or clarifying vocabulary, or maybe listening to a short extract. But if that's good for them, that's what they're going to take away. And I think it's imagining, you know, what do they really need? Put yourself in their shoes. I think that can be really useful. Okay, a couple of things on needs analysis. There are lots of different formats these can take, and I think it's important to have a needs analysis near the beginning and at different stages through your course, perhaps different formats too for variety. I'll show you a couple of these. And if we have time at the end in the Q&A, I've got some ideas for feedback too, if you're interested. So a menu approach is something that is similar to the way Business One-to-One, which is an OUP publication, is presented. The contents page is a list of how to do something. And with your student, you would go through and tick a number of units that you could look at. So a menu, for example, lists things, I would say, that you as a teacher can offer your student. And you're not going to put the price, it's not like a restaurant menu with the food, but perhaps how long you think would be reasonable to spend on those things. And if you do this on cards, the student can choose maybe things they want to do now or soon, and then maybe at a later date, or maybe not at all. A very typical needs analysis is a questionnaire, which is suitable, I think, in English from probably pre-intermediate upwards. This is from a fabulous book by Ingrid Wisniewska. It's Cambridge publication. There are lots of examples of these sorts of formats on the CD-ROM that comes with the book. I met her in Liverpool at IATEFL a couple of years ago. I was sitting next to her in a plenary and we had to chat to do a task or something. I didn't know who she was. And she looked at my name badge and she said, "Oh, that's an interesting name." And I said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Oh, yes, I live on Appleby Street in Rhode Island." So she's not going to forget me and I'm not going to forget her. And of course, I immediately went down to the bookstore and bought her book, which I should have bought a long time ago. I strongly recommend it. So this is one way of doing a needs analysis. And the second page of this one for her is where you tick, the student would tick specific areas that they want help with. Another example she's got is where you ask the student to prioritize the skills, excuse me, the skills that they'd like to work on. You can take a different approach. This is something from Evan Frendo, where here we're looking at communication in English, and you could use this framework as it is, or you could ask the student to fill in the circles on the outside themselves or to add more circles. The idea being that they say what they want to do. I mentioned before that I think one-to-one teaching is very much about mutually beneficial learning. Okay, and finally, the third part is about effective language practice. And I'm going to talk about three things: chat, framework materials, which I'll just touch on, and then the Wilberg paradigm, which is something he mentions in detail in his book, which I really very strongly recommend. So chat is maybe the beginning of the lesson, maybe the start of the lesson. And this is the chat that I try to ensure is as genuine and as authentic as possible. So I might talk about anything. If I know the students a bit, I'm going to ask them about something we talked about last week, or family, or work, or the weather, or whatever it might be. But I'm also I'm paying attention to what they're saying. So it's not only the language, but also the topic, so that if anything comes up that's relevant, I can include that for some practice later on. But I am going to make sure that it's as genuine as possible. I might not write anything down, but I will have my ears paying attention, if you like. And when I do come to write something down, I might use a format a little bit like this, which I would fill in pencil. Now, I tend to fill this in while I'm still paying attention to the student. So I'm usually not looking at what I'm writing. Now, that has two advantages. Well, one advantage is that it's in pencil, so it's more difficult to read. The other advantage is that the student probably can't read it because it's my writing when I'm not looking at them. And I think that's sometimes important, that I'm just scribbling something that doesn't matter. But I do make sure that then when we're going to look at this sheet together, the student can read it. So I might rewrite things that I want to look at again for her to see or him to see. I do make a point of filling in the first column on the left, good language that the student uses. And then the column on the right, we're going to discuss and work on together based on the middle column. But I use this all the time. It might be something that I type up later and I send to the student if it's got some useful language in it. Frameworks, as I mentioned, I touched on, these are really empty boxes or frameworks that you can use to encourage your student to talk. So you really give them a framework to help organize their thoughts or their ideas so they can concentrate on what it is they want to say. So they can take notes in these boxes, and then you use this as a springboard for a discussion. Now, something like this one, they might not want to talk about all these areas, which is absolutely fine. They might want to talk about work, in which case they won't be talking about the lunch break in the evening, or they might specifically not want to talk about work, which is fine. Whatever it is, you've got a framework, you've got a starting point, and that's going to help you promote a decent discussion. And again, it doesn't presuppose any specific language. It can be used at most levels. The Wilberg paradigm is a little bit more complicated. Now I'm going to show this to you, but I mention it on that it's where it comes from. And I will also make these slides available on my blog. I'll give you that link at the end, so you can go back to these later. Now the paradigm is based on doing something with something. Now you might start with a text. So your initial format could be a written text document to read, or it could be a dialogue, or it could be some audio, a TED video or something. The idea being that you then do something with that, that's your middle column, and then you do something, you end up with a different document. Now you might go from a written text to a different written text. So it could be that you start off with some notes that you then turn into an email, or it could be that you start off with an email that you then turn into a phone conversation. The idea being that you've got three things and you start with one format and you end up with something different. Let me show you an example of this. This is something I did with one of my students. I have a student who's at C1, C2 level. She's deputy head of department at one of the universities here, and she occasionally runs one-day workshops and conferences and so on. And she turned up one lesson, she said, well, I've got to introduce the plenary speaker and I really don't know what to say about him. And I asked her what she already knew about him. And she said, well, I've got this text here. This is his biography. So she showed me the biography and I said, well, you know, what part of this would be important for you to include? So she highlighted key information and she added one or two more bits of information that she wanted to include. And we put this on Post-its and organized them into a table. So we had a beginning, a middle and an end, if you like, a beginning, a middle and an end of a mini introduction, introducing a speaker. We then worked together on how to put those ideas into complete sentences. So she came up with ideas and I was reformulating, helping her to make those into full sentences. She then read out, she did a dummy run, if you like, of this, and she was stressing the important words and we recorded that. Now, she doesn't like this much, but she's getting used to it because we do it quite often. And sometimes she'll record herself at home and listen to it, and I think she does. And sometimes she lets me record her and we'll listen to it together, or she'll take it away and she'll listen to it. And then, if necessary, I might also try recording the text or reading it out for her to emphasize some of the key words. There is, yes, a lot of scaffolding going on. So there are lots of stages you will need to build in. This is really just in a nutshell, the 3 stages. So I would then also recap again at the end of the lesson. But we've gone here from a biography to organizing information into a table and then making a mini recording. So here's your text, turn it into a table and then use that to make a recording. Yes, lots of different learning styles addressed, Julia. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is just one way of using the Wilberg paradigm, but there are lots of different ones. And I think thinking about it really helps you lift what you're doing off the page, off the table. It helps you hand over work and learning to the student and gives you actually a final format to work with. So I think there are lots of really good advantages of this. Okay. Another quotation for you. So a quick recap. These were the 3 things I was talking about. The dynamics, do you remember? Also lots of space, a little bit of dancing and lots of different materials to take the focus off just the you and the me. Students' needs, where possible, focusing on what they want, letting the students lead the lesson, making sure your lessons are personalized and regular needs analysis and, in brackets, feedback. And plenty of different ways of, we haven't really had a chance to talk much about this, effective language practice. So really exploiting the chat and any other talk that's going on and taking notes. And frameworks are a good way of encouraging talk and using the Wilberg paradigm in different ways. For me, the positives are numerous in teaching one-to-one. Here are some of them. I don't know if you have any other adjectives that you would add, other positives, benefits of one-to-one teaching. By all means, put any words you've got in the chat box. For me, it's hugely enjoyable. And it's certainly a context I like most. Great, great. Yeah, ideally, if your student is a friend, I try to make sure that all my students are friends. It's not always the case, but mostly is. and that really helps the communication. Yep. Nice, thank you. Yes, it can be very relaxing. And I think, thanks, Julian. Yes, if you're asking the right questions, and I think that's a challenge, we haven't talked about that, but asking the right questions will really help you, I think, make the most of your one-to-one lessons, get the best out of your students. Very motivating, yes. As far as possible, it is really very satisfying, yes, when you see them develop, because you're focusing on what they need, is very nice. A real connection, yeah, that's always the case, Valentina. Thank you very much. Shireen, thanks for that reminder. Yes, there are a lot of stages you need to build in. Great, and yeah, hugely rewarding. Lots of very nice ideas here. Thank you very much for those. Lots of adrenaline. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Leo. This is a list of some of the things that I've referred to. Again, as I mentioned, these slides will be on my blog. And if you take your phone now, you can, if you take a photo of, point your camera at the QR code, that'll take you to the blog. If you want the slides, you'll find them near the top of the blog. Decades and decades indeed, Julia. Yes, my one-to-one students are very special and very precious people. Thank you very much indeed. I haven't finished here really, because I would be very willing to answer any questions or add any comments if you would like. Perhaps at this point I'll stop sharing, but thank you very much for those comments. It's extremely useful and informative, actually. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so Rachel, thank you. I would absolutely ask if anybody has any questions, then if you want to start adding them now to the chat box, and we'll ask Rachel to answer those. That would be great. You're getting lots of thank yous, Rachel. We had lots of interaction, which was great. And I noticed that Francesca Di Mambro, I'm sorry if I haven't pronounced that correctly, loved your waltzing idea. I thought that was a fab idea. Gillian at one point suggested bringing along vocabulary to each of the lessons, as well as her thing that she likes to make sure that she's got always with her for the next lesson. And yeah, just loads of comments saying fab idea, really interesting idea. So really inspiring. There you go, from Oksana. So yeah, all looking.
But Philippa, yes, Wilberg, do look into it. I recommend it. It really helps encourage you as a teacher to think about different stages, and scaffolding is another word that comes up. Oh, thanks, Vicky. That's kind. There is a Q&A. Vicky, you mentioned you'd like some feedback ideas. I'll just show you a few in a tick. Let me just see. I'm just reading Francesca's question. My one-to-one students don't get as much question practice as they would in a group. Class one-sided and less natural with less naturally inquisitive students. Forcing students to ask questions. Yeah, you might like to try this idea that I did with my one-to-one student who sends me articles with questions. So it could be that sometimes I give options for my students for homework. So you could look at this video, or you could look at this article, or this, and I might give them, it might be written or audio, and choose one and write questions about it. Write me 3 questions, and then I'll watch or read it, maybe to get some answers. I don't know whether that helps at all.
That was kind of the same thing as we had Linda Tuttle who came in. Could you give us an example of the right questions, which is of a similar ilk?
Yes, I might just come back to that. Valentina's written, in the student that I with students, how do you handle the actual lesson, reducing teacher talk, getting students speak about the testing? Okay, nice question. So when they've asked me these questions, they're usually, when was the last time the director directed a film or something? They're usually fairly simple questions. So that's the answering those questions is fairly simple. I usually come up with an exercise to use the vocabulary, and I might divide the vocabulary into two lots. So there's one set of vocabulary where some of the words are weird and wonderful. And if you read stuff in The Guardian about Japanese film, so they're words that you might want to recognize, so for passive recognition, but you might not need to encourage the student might not want to use them, although if that's their topic of interest, they might. So I tend to do a little activity, an exercise to help them with the words so they recognize them next time. And then I might do something a little bit more elaborate to help them use the words, which I think will be good for them to start practicing. So I do that with the vocabulary. And then I also come up with 2 or 3 discussion questions about the text. So what is it do you think about, let's say, Japanese films that have made them so popular? Or do you know other people, tell me about other films which are similar, or other, maybe other people who are trying to create similar films in different countries. What is the appeal? Now, this is a guy who's, I think he's partly Buddhist, partly into meditation. He's a real deep thinker. So I have to be quite careful about the questions I come up with for him, because he will really think about them. But I hope that helps a little bit answering your questions.
We have another one from John Goodyear. Given that you are teaching one-to-one in Budapest, Hungary, to what extent are your one-to-one sessions with individual students also a window into Hungarian culture? Any notable insights that you have impacted on your teaching practice?
Oh, well, that's I have to think about that one.
Really
thanks,
interesting question,
John, for that.
Yeah.
It depends. I do some one-to-one classes preparing students to apply to university in the UK or Denmark or Holland or the US, and that implies my knowing about those university contacts. But also what I have to do is to drag information out of them to help them write their motivation letters or personal statements, so that they come across as interesting people. Now, normally they are quite interesting people, but getting them to put that on paper is really hard. Sometimes you get students who are so full of ideas and all the voluntary work they've done that all you're doing is sort of trying to distill and get the best out of them. With other students, it is really like getting blood out of a stone. But they tell you things, all sorts of things. Like, I've got a student I was working with yesterday who's been working at a winery towards Lake Balaton, bottling and labeling and talking about the different wines, because his dad owns a restaurant, it turned out. So I've been learning a little bit about that through him. I mean, wine is obviously a big thing in Hungary. Another student similarly dug up her relatives, all sorts of information about her relatives at the local museum in Kecskemét. They'd lived through the Holocaust, and a lot of the information was stored there. That was extraordinarily interesting. I mean, I didn't get all the background information, but a little bit there. By and large, John, I would say it's normally about their work, less about the culture, although I'm genuinely interested in the culture, and perhaps I would be more interested in that, whereas I really need to focus on what they need to do for their work. So I think there are more options there that I don't exploit.
We have a few more questions actually. So in the Q&A bit, yes. Mary Hassany, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Rachel, do these strategies work with beginner students who have no English? Any advice?
Mary, some of those won't work with beginner students. You're absolutely right. And if I'm working with Hungarian beginner students, that I haven't actually done that for a long time, but I would use a needs analysis, for example, in Hungarian, because you can't do it. But usually at beginner level, you know what they need. So it's a case of, are we talking about general English or business English? And that's probably the only difference to start with. I think I do lots of stuff with materials, with post-its, with bits of paper, with dice, with pens and paper and all sorts of things with low-level students. I obviously don't get them to listen randomly to articles or look at texts. I confess that most of my students are probably intermediate upwards, and half of them are probably higher level, so they're not beginner level. I have taught beginner level students. I'm just trying to think of some of the things I've been talking about. I mean, all the things about space and handing over to your student, giving them choice, those things, absolutely. It doesn't matter what level the students are. I think that's important, and how you handle vocabulary. But I try to make things even more tangible and dynamic, I think, with a beginner level. I hope that helps.
Another really interesting question from Julia: how to deal with, or how do we deal with psychological problems some students might have, like the personal boundaries, problems with getting feedback?
Julia, can you clarify? I don't exactly understand the question. Sorry, you mean getting feedback from the student about what you're doing, or? Sorry,
I guess personal boundaries side of things. Julia, if you're there, are you? I don't know if you're still with us. Please, could you clarify on that? We also asked, Linda Tuttle asked, could you speak a bit more about giving feedback? So both those questions touch on the feedback side of things. So giving some more feedback. We also have.
Yes, I'll show you some slides in a tick on feedback.
Yeah, we have one from Francesca. I feel my one-to-one students don't get as much questions practice as they would in a group. Classes can be a bit one-sided with less naturally inquisitive students. I've thought about forcing it, e.g. every class you have to ask me 5 questions, but would welcome any advice about this.
Thank you. Yes, I did actually address that earlier on, Freya. You were kindly looking at other questions for me. No, thank you. So I was suggesting that you give the student time to, I mean, it could be in their own time outside the class, or say, have a look at this, write down some questions, and very often, online or offline, I'll say to students, okay, let me just leave you here for a minute. I'm just going to, if I'm at home, if I'm here, I'll say, have a look at this, or have a look at the exercise, or write some questions, or whatever. I'm just going to get something from the other room. And I actually just go and kill time for 2 minutes. Online, I'll say, let me give you a few minutes to read this. I'm just going to turn off my camera, okay? You can turn yours off if you like. And then I'll turn my camera back on after a few minutes when I think I've given them enough time. That, I think, takes the pressure off. I think that can be helpful. And often I'll go and make another coffee for them or whatever. Somebody mentioned large classes, but actually this is really about one-to-one lessons. As a message, I'm going to come back to the feedback in a moment.
There's one more from Andrea.
Yes, I've got that.
Yeah.
I worry at points in a long collaboration, my students get used to me, my style, my English. They're comfortable with making mistakes, but they lack practice with other people. Yes, that can be the case. And I think that can be quite difficult. In a one-to-one, in a real context, you can bring in a friend. That sometimes happens. I think people have told me, oh, I had a friend staying, so they sat in on my class. Now that is not very realistic, but you might think about having somebody else there, or suggesting that, you know, how do they get on when they talk to somebody else in English? So if they're doing this, what's it like? Can they record any of that situation? And how did they feel? How did they feel it was? Because, you know, I know exactly what you mean. Yes, they're comfortable with you and they know that it doesn't matter if they make mistakes. Get them to raise their awareness about when they're with other people. Maybe that might be a thought. I'm not sure if Julia's still here.
Julia hasn't come back in yet.
Inviting a guest online. Yes, that's quite nice. Yes, Catherine, thank you. So you could have somebody else there with your student's permission. And maybe if you tell them a little bit about that person, yep, they could prepare in advance. Thanks for that very much. I'm just going to delay the vaccinate question. I'm just going to show some slides I've got on, where's my PowerPoint slide? PowerPoint presentation. Just going back to that. Okay, let me just, if that's okay, Freya, I'll just share a few slides at the end. I've got 1 or 2 slides here, if you can see these. Lots and lots of ways, and specifically from Ingrid's book. So some very simple things. Here, today's lesson was easy because, or today's lesson was difficult because. And don't assume this as the teacher, because actually you've no idea. I often misjudge what the student is taking away from the lesson. And I think it's really important to do this. Now, I did something like this with one of my students. I've typed this up so you can see it, but I developed Ingrid's questionnaire. I typed it up, and let me show you what my student wrote. So we were talking about a Netflix series at one point, Line of Duty. I'll just give you 1 minute to read that. So for me, this was really useful. Clearly, she liked the examples I was giving her, the first bit where there's a tick, alternatives to express something more accurately. And I tried to give her several ways because she's a fairly advanced speaker. So she knows how she likes to say things and not, what she's comfortable with. Speaking fluently for a longer time was a challenge. So either you break that down or you do that more regularly if that's something she needs to be able to do. She mentions that she wanted more vocab work, but perhaps more focused speaking. And then there are some little bits at the bottom. Most of this is very positive, but it's still very useful. She said it was difficult to talk about management problems in English, and yet she's always talking about her colleagues. She's not talking behind their backs, you know, she's just telling me, I don't know these people. She's telling me about them. So I think that's an area that perhaps is important for her. So that's one feedback thing. Something taken from Business 1-to-1, really simple idea, and you get this little box on at the end of every double page spread in the 1-to-1 book. I tend to adapt this actually for my lessons because it's not always about words or phrases. Sometimes it's a bit more abstract, you know, more confidence in speaking, or the ability to sound more natural might be something. Something I often do in a lesson is a little piece of paper, and this piece of paper is the size of a post-it. So I asked them to write down something that they liked, something they didn't really like, something that they can use, they can immediately take away and try out, and something they've got a question about. I also do this in group training sessions, and it's super quick and incredibly telling. And it tells you things that you really didn't quite know. So I think as a teacher, you presume sometimes what students like. I think that's all. So those are my feedback ideas. I hope that'll give you a few things. There've been a few more questions.
Julia's come back actually, and she's just explained that, sorry, her Zoom crashed, but also she's explained that
okay, I'm with you.
She meant when doing one-to-ones,
Okay, so all the personal stuff. Well, yes, Julia, you're probably more qualified to deal with these things. Your Live and Learn podcast and all the rest, and all your background and training than I am. And if they're talking too much about personal stuff, I will sort of let it happen. But then I might say, shall we move on to, you mentioned last week, or let's have a look at this vocab, or I might try to push it one side. Sometimes because I don't want negative gossip, or I don't want this to get all emotional and personal, and I don't deal with students who are going to burst into tears on me. I'm not that sort of a teacher. I like to keep it a little bit cooler. So if it's relevant and we can keep it at a distance and still handle it and turn it into something useful, then I think I can deal with it. But I try to keep the emotional out of it. Now, if you're absolutely stuck and that you realize that you're not going to be able to do anything with the student, then you might just let them talk, and I might take notes, and I might do nothing with those notes afterwards. I think that can be difficult. But if they need to just talk, then, just let them. It's their hour, they pay for it. Yeah. Oksana, most of my one-to-one lessons are 60 minutes or 90. And if they're 90, I usually offer the student a couple of minutes break in the middle if they want. And quite often they say yes. George, yes, thank you, nice comment.
So I think there was, if we just maybe do one more question, there was, do you do this feedback after every class or just once in a while?
I don't do feedback after every class, I do it once in a while. I usually do a different kind of feedback too at different times, but I always try and keep it short. If it's long, it's like, it's going to take forever, and that's not the point. So the shorter and snappier it can be, the better. And that little box I showed you, that's hugely effective. But the one where my student filled in the gaps, I sent that to her as a Word document. I actually did it because I was running a workshop about, can't remember now. And I said, I just, you know, I'm collecting feedback, and because I'm doing some teacher training. Would you fill this in for me? I'm not going to, you know, say who you are or anything. So it gave her time to fill it in at home. And actually, we discussed it afterwards. It was really useful. Yes, I've got that message now. Thank you. Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Vaccinate students against making mistakes. Somebody mentioned. I don't. My students do make mistakes always, all the time, Linda. And well, that's about learning. Sometimes it doesn't matter. So it depends what the student is discussing, whether the mistakes they're making are important. I might write them down. If the message is clear and they're practicing fluency, then that's great. If it's a mistake that's going to make them look a bit silly, then we talk about that. So I might say, well, actually in English, we don't say that. There was something the other day, actually, I had an email from a very capable colleague of mine who sends emails to groups of students saying, dears, comma, and then goes on. And to me, that's like Aunt Agatha, you know, being rather condescending and talking down to her students. And in Hungarian, kedvesek, it works, you know, but in English, I don't think it does. And I said to her, I'm not sure about this. And she's not a student of mine. She's a good friend and colleague. And she said, oh, okay. Actually, I translated it. You're right. You know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But so I don't vaccinate my students against mistakes. I tend to play with mistakes, work with them, and they become memorable, I hope, positive learning experiences.
Rachel, that has been amazing. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to bring it to an end now, but I would like to say thank you again, Rachel. A superb presentation and chat. We've had some great feedback. It's been ongoing throughout the discussion, and lots of people saying really interesting, great speaker, thanks a lot, it was really interesting. So thank you, Rachel. That just leaves me to say thank you to everybody who joined us today to Rachel's session, and thank you for attending. I just also want to say or remind you that the next session will be with Silvana Richardson, who is presenting teacher to teacher trainer, and this is actually coming up in April. On the 29th of April. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that too. And I did notice in the chat that people were asking for your email again. Rachel, are you okay for me to just quickly say that?
I'm putting it in.
Yeah, if you want to email Rachel with any questions after this, then I think she'd obviously very.
Oh no, please do get in touch. Linda, thank you for waltzing away with mistakes. I'm going to waltz away with mistakes now, but I think that's my email address. There you go.
Perfect. There we go.
Yeah, you're welcome. Can I just thank participants for your fantastic involvement and engagement? It makes all the difference. I felt as if you're really right here in the room with me, which is just lovely. Thank you so much. And Freya, thank you for hosting this beautifully.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And on that note, take care, everybody. Stay safe and goodbye. See you at the next session. Okay, bye.